Oh, sorry. So, basically the way this works is, okay, so there's basically the little pieces that go into this are a bunch of little tiny things. Um, there are, at least again, this is just what was in mine, and I assume it was correct, but who knows? Maybe someone tinkered with it, or it came out of the factory different. Uh, we all know that happens. Um, so basically, what happened, or the way this works, is you have three springs. There's this one right here. This is, again, this is, I don't want to say it's really horrible engineering, but it's just, maybe it's just older style way of doing things. Nowadays, things would be easier to put together and take apart. Although the thing is really, like, it says not to take this apart, and you don't have to, but it really makes working on some of this easier in certain situations. And if you break this little piece, you have to take it apart, and so. And it really just seems like they could have maybe saved money by just designing this a little differently. Um, not a ton of money, but just I don't know. I don't know. I like really simplistic engineering, so that if you take something apart, it's easy to put back together and all that. And usually, if there's more little tiny parts like this, it's hard to put back together, and you have to catalog all these extra parts. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. So basically, okay, so this is the first spring that you have. And what this is, these are three pieces, but I'm holding together because they're really fun to put back together because they're really small. You have this first little spring here, and what this does is this essentially has this little, triangle piece there on the end of the other side. And what this does is, this whole assembly is basically being smashed between two plates the whole time. So what happens is, all these springs are in compression. Which is what it gives you that whole, which gives you the whole effect of when you click the blinker down and click it up. That's where all this is coming from. So where this goes, again, I'm kind of just going through this because it was not straightforward for me to figure out because everything is symmetrical. I basically looked at the way that mine was constructed, and so when you're in here, you'll notice that on the top you have these little, like, staple-looking things. They're really contacts for your turn signals. And down here at the bottom, you don't have those. You'll also notice that up here at the top and the bottom, you have these little divots, the little black thing up there. And you have another one right down here. Now, what that's for, at least what I can gather, is that's for this little wedge piece. So when you click your blinker up and down, it fits, it basically pops down that little groove, or pops out of it. The thing is, when I took this apart, I thought there would be two of them, because there's a groove at the top and there's, a groove at the bottom. But no. At least in mine, which I'm guessing this is how all of them are, there's just one. So, I basically, when I reassembled this already, and I verified that it worked properly, but I've had to take it apart because I forgot to put that thing in. That actually has to go between this black piece and that metal part, and I totally forgot that until I had the wheel already on, or practically had the wheel on. And that's a thing that fits in these little grooves right here, fit in those the back of the steering wheel right there. And that whole thing, again, needs to be between, in this little cavity between here and that plate when you put it back together. So, anyway, so back to this. So the way that I reconstructed this was I put this first plastic piece I mentioned, I put that in the top up here. And when I say the top, basically when this thing fits back in, and again, I don't have three hands, so it's hard to do this, but when this thing fits back in there, that one with the groove, that one right there, it went up here, and nothing went in this one down here in this little hole. Right here, there's another spring here. They are all slightly different, I believe, at least mine are, in diameter and length, but I put this one, had an end cap on it, because that end cap is what, as you can see on this one, is what it it's what rotates or rubs against this metal plate here. So I put that one here, and then I put the ball bearing on the very back end. So essentially it's the same as setting up this one, except for having the plastic piece, there's a ball bearing that goes in the end. And it doesn't really like fit there, you just kind of have to like stick this in, put the ball bearing in, and then put this guy on top. There's the ball bearing right there. I didn't see two of them, so I guess there's just one. I didn't think it was going to work properly because I thought it'd have to have a little ridge like that, but when I clicked it up and down, the turn signal thing worked fine, and it didn't get stuck or anything. Now, the last thing that is very important is the this last spring here. Now, there's lots of grease in these things, which, you know, is good, but it's almost excessive, I would say. So this thing's actually just sticking in here because there's so much grease. This is just another spring. It's a lot fatter and shorter, and it does have one of those end caps, and as you can see there, it's a lot fatter. And this is, you know, again, really important for your turn signals to work, because what happens is, I thought this is just some actual metal piece of felt. What this is, I looked at it, and it has these little ridges, like, you know, like it's been rolling on something. I was like, oh, of course, this is what, you know, turns on those turn signals, depending on which way you rotate. So this actually fits perfectly in there, and this will fall out if you're not careful. So again, it's very hard to assemble, but when you rotate this back and forth, that thing rolls against these little staple looking things, and that turns in your turn signals depending on which direction you have this rotated in. So that's really the hardest part of putting this all together, is knowing how all these little things go together, putting them in there and actually getting them to stay when, like, you know, turning it around and hoping that they won't fall out. Again, there's so much grease in here, so this thing just kind of sits in there. Getting them to stay in there is not so bad. See, it just fell out. And really, for the most part, you can put it in just like this. The only thing that you have to kind of make sure stays in there is this. You don't have to put those other springs in here and in this bottom one down here. It's just this top one that really has to be in there, because you have to make sure that goes in the correct channel, because if that is not in there correctly, your turn signals will not work. So to reassemble this, you essentially just put it back in with that thing already in the back of here. And you kind of have to finagle this thing right here, because obviously this all has to line up perfectly. But what you'll do is you'll put your turn signal, I can't really rotate it because again I have only two hands, you'll rotate it in such a way that you'll have it in the correct position like this. This plastic piece needs to rotate around and basically stick down into that channel, so that whenever it is in there properly, and this will be the way it looked when you took it apart. It'll essentially look like this. This is what the profile will look when you have inserted this properly in here. The arc kind of follows this arc too. So it's a little hard to get that set up and this to pop in at the same time, but it's not too bad. And basically, after you have those put in, then you, so say if you already had that black piece in here, you'd stick those two other springs in. Again, this one down here would have the ball bearing, and then put the spring and a little plastic cap on. This one up here is a lot easier, which is that guy, and you just basically stick them right in there. And then don't forget this thing when you decide that you want to put that metal piece back on. And so basically you just put that metal piece back on top of there, and then you tighten down these two screws. Since this is all pressure fitted, you're really going to have to hold it like a sandwich and just kind of hold it like this while you put these two screws in, because if you don't, you're going to have these things popping out, and you're going to have to take the whole thing apart and reconfigure it, and then try it again. So as you can see, what I've done here is I basically just completely took it off the shaft. It's a lot easier to work on that way. I essentially, pushed the whole steering wheel assembly all the way back and hold this off of the shaft there, so it's a little easier to work on. So if you have any questions, let me know, but I just figured I'd kind of catalog this because it was not really straightforward to figure out, and there was no documentation on it that I found. Even though people usually don't take this apart, I figured someone else might actually break this the way I did, or the turn signals wouldn't work, instead of having to buy a whole new unit and using parts that you may not have to use, new old stock parts, you could fix your own. I kind of like fixing my own stuff instead of having to buy new things, because I figure there's only a certain amount of these in the world, and they kind of deserve our effort to try to preserve them as much as we can. And if I can fix this, or if I can repaint my tail lights to look new again, then I don't have to buy new tail lights, and I don't have to buy a new one of these. So, okay, well, thanks for listening. I hope it helps someone.